Welcome back to today's video. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the Republican and Democratic primary in the state of New Hampshire, as well as looking at Joe Biden's path to 270 for the 2024 election. Let's go right into today's video. Alright, welcome back to LT Election 2024. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the New Hampshire Republican and Democratic primary and taking a look at how this primary can shape up a Joe Biden re-election for the 2024 election. So taking a look here, we had the Republican New Hampshire primary, and we saw that Donald Trump ended up winning almost 55% of the vote, 54.3% to be more specific. And we have Nikki Haley here at 43.2%. And of course, we had some other candidates, if I were to just show them, who ended up winning under 1% of the vote here. But obviously, most of these candidates, all these candidates, I believe, have dropped out except Ryan Binkley. But we did see some of the other candidates did win a certain number of votes. But what we did see was that Nikki Haley actually came in second, a strong second finish for Nikki Haley with 43.2% of the vote, winning 9 delegates, and Donald Trump winning 54.3% of the vote and 12 delegates. Now, how accurate was the polling data in the lead up to this primary? Well, looking here at the primary here for the Republican primary, we saw that the polls actually were very accurate with regards to predicting what Donald Trump would win. Donald Trump, according to most polling, was expected to win 53.9%. In the actual election, he ended up winning 54.3%. So that's a very good thing that the polling data was very accurate. It was only off by 0.4%, an extremely small margin of error for a poll. Whereas when it came to Nikki Haley, it actually underestimated Nikki Haley. So the poll, according to 538, on average, averages of January 23rd, 2024, it was that Nikki Haley would get 36.3%. 36.3%. She actually ended up winning around 43 point something percent. So the polling data definitely underestimated Nikki Haley. But what does this primary show? Well, first of all, we got to recognize this was an open primary, which means that obviously a lot of independents voted for Nikki Haley and a lot of maybe conservative Democrats, people like that, possibly voted for Nikki Haley, which would make it a little bit more difficult for Donald Trump to win in a bigger margin like he did in Iowa or in another state. Also, the fact that New Hampshire Republicans are much more liberal than Iowan Republicans, which would explain that fact. But Donald Trump ended up winning about 55% of the vote. Now we're going to contrast that to what President Biden was able to win. Now, President Biden was actually able to pull off a pretty good win here. Now, I know some people will try to underestimate this, but you have to recognize a couple things. Joe Biden ended up winning 64% of the vote. 64% of the vote. Now, the important thing to recognize is if he won 64% of the vote, that would not be a lot. But the thing is that Joe Biden was actually a write-in candidate, meaning that individuals do not actually have the option of choosing his name on the ballot. They would actually have to write his name in, which would be obviously much more difficult for Joe Biden to get votes, as one may suppose. Now, the reason why Joe Biden was not on the ballot in New Hampshire was because Joe Biden's campaign wanted the primary to happen in South Carolina, although the DNC said, no, we're going to do the primary in New Hampshire. And Joe Biden basically said, okay, I'm not going to run in New Hampshire, and people can write me in as a write-in candidate, but I'm not going to run in New Hampshire. Well, it ended up working for Joe Biden. He ended up winning 64% of the vote. And Dean Phillips did do a pretty good job. I have to give him credit for this. He ended up winning 20% of the vote, which for an independent candidate, for a candidate running against an incumbent president, that is quite a lot. We saw that Marianne Williamson ended up getting 4.0% of the vote. That's 5,006 votes there. We saw that other write-ins as well got 8.3% of the vote. And then we saw some other minor candidates here getting less than 1% of the vote. But we did see here that Joe Biden ended up winning 64% of the vote as a write-in candidate. Now, the reason why it's important is because he was a write-in candidate. If he was just doing a normal election where he was actually on the ballot, I would say that this would be a very low margin for Joe Biden. But the fact that he was a write-in candidate and ended up winning 64% of the vote is very good news for Joe Biden. Now, let's compare that to different primaries that happened in the state of New Hampshire for incumbent presidents. So going back to the 2020 Republican primary, when Donald Trump was the incumbent, we saw that he ended up winning 86% of the vote. Now, he was on the ballot, so he ended up winning 86% of the vote. William Weld ended up winning 9.2% of the vote, and then some write-in candidates ended up winning less than 1%, followed by 2.5% for write-ins. But what we saw there is that Donald Trump ended up winning 86% of the vote. Now, that is higher than Joe Biden. But again, Joe Biden was a write-in candidate. When you go back to the 2012 election with Barack Obama running as an incumbent in the state of New Hampshire, we saw that he ended up winning 81% approximately of the vote. So approximately 81% of the vote, which just go to show that Barack Obama, a lot of people like to point out how Barack Obama ended up winning re-election, which could point out to how Joe Biden could end up winning re-election. And we did see that Barack Obama only won 81% of the vote. But at the same time, you have to recognize that Barack Obama was not a write-in candidate. Joe Biden was a write-in candidate. And even as a write-in candidate, Joe Biden was able to secure a pretty solid victory there in the state of New Hampshire. So what does this mean for the general election? Well, first of all, let's take a look at another thing here. Let's take a look at how accurate polling data was. So polling data, I would say, was relatively accurate. Relatively, it was okay. We saw here that Joe Biden was in the low 60s. He was in the high 60s in this poll. Although, I mean, I would say that the polling data a little bit underestimated him. Phillips, I don't think the polling data underestimated him. I feel like he was right in there. He got in 28% and 32% in two polls, which would show some dissatisfaction for Joe Biden. Although the polling data was not too off with the rest of the polling data. Now, the problem for Joe Biden is Donald Trump ended up winning 55% of the vote, 54%, and Joe Biden ended up winning 63%, 64% of the vote. Okay? Now, what does that mean? Well, it could mean a couple of things. Number one, you have Nikki Haley supporters who may not end up voting for Donald Trump since he only got 55% of the vote. Now, it was an open primary, which is a lot of what Donald Trump's people are saying. But anyway, Donald Trump only got 55% of the vote. And what we saw here with Joe Biden is that he ended up winning 64% of the vote. So what does this mean for the general election? Well, what this means for the general election is that Joe Biden is still behind of Donald Trump. That's what it means for the general election, according to polling data. All that being said, polling data is not 100% accurate. So we see here in the majority of the polling data, we see that Donald Trump is maintaining his lead, as I have been saying consistently. Although, again, I'm just looking at a path for Joe Biden. This is not a prediction. This is a path that Joe Biden could have to 270. Right now, Joe Biden, I would give Joe Biden about a 35% chance of winning the presidency. I don't see him having a very high chance of winning the presidency. He's behind in Donald Trump in almost every one of the polls. Whereas if you go back to the 2020 cycle, for example, if I were to go back to the 2020 cycle, we can see here that rarely did, this is in the state of Florida. Let's look at the general election poll. We see that Biden was ahead by 3 points, and then we'll skip the Florida since Florida it ended up going to Donald Trump anyways. In Pennsylvania, we saw Joe Biden was ahead in a majority of the polls here. Iowa, we saw that Joe Biden was ahead. In South Carolina, we saw Donald Trump was ahead. In the general election, this is what I want to pay attention to. In the general election, according to polling data, Joe Biden was ahead in basically every single poll according to the general election, and he ended up winning by approximately the same margin, 4.5%. But now when you go back to the 2024 cycle, what you can see is that in the general election here, we see here that Trump is leading Joe Biden by almost around the same margins, a lot lower than Joe Biden was in 2020, but it still is a big margin for Donald Trump. 5 to 6 points is a big margin. That being said, we do see here that the Democratic Party is kind of unifying itself around President Biden. It is unifying itself around President Biden due to the fact that he ended up getting 64% of the vote as a write-in candidate. So what's Joe Biden's path to 270? Well, I have the map written out here with your safe states, your lean states, your likely states, some of those states already put on. Let's take a look here at some of your swing states. So you have your Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, and Maine's 2nd Congressional District. Now, I put Virginia as being a swing state just because of the fact that Joe Biden's only leading in that state by around 2 to 3 points, and Donald Trump is leading in many swing states by around 2 to 3 points in states like Michigan. So I ended up putting Virginia as being a swing state, although Minnesota is going lean for Joe Biden. Lean right now for Joe Biden. I have it on my map. And obviously, you have Maine's 2nd Congressional District and Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. So now what's Joe Biden's path? Well, he has a couple paths. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and give him the most likely state that he's going to win. Virginia. We're going to go ahead and give him that state by a top margin. And this video is going to be more of a discussion type video, less of a prediction video, so just keep that in mind here. But we're going to go ahead and give Joe Biden the state of Virginia as being tilt for him. That's 13 electoral votes. That puts him 8 electoral votes above former President Trump, and we have 95 toss-up electoral votes left. Let's take a look at here and give Joe Biden here the state of Arizona. Let's go ahead and give him the state of Arizona. So Arizona there voted for Joe Biden in the last election. And then let's go ahead and give Joe Biden the state of Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania also voted for Joe Biden in the last election, ended up losing one electoral vote after the 2022 redistricting that occurred. It ended up losing one electoral vote, and after the 2020 census. And let's say he wins Pennsylvania and then wins Michigan. Okay, that would put him on the brisk of getting 270. So you a win in Arizona, a win in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. That would put him on the brink of being on 270. Okay, so that's one scenario that we could see for Joe Biden. So this is scenario number one, most likely. Now, what's another scenario that you could end up seeing for Joe Biden? Now, this prediction is only going to do a scenario for Joe Biden. It's not going to do a scenario for Donald Trump. I did a scenario video for both Donald Trump and Joe Biden a couple of days ago. The link for that video will be in the description below, but make sure you go back and take a look at that video as well. But there's a lot of things to note here with regards to my second one. So my second map here for Joe Biden is he could keep Nevada. He ended up winning that state by around 2.4%. That would put him neck and neck with Donald Trump with 102 electoral votes remaining. He could keep Virginia, right? Keep Virginia, 13 electoral votes. And then he could try to get some sort of array of these states, okay? So let's say he were to win a state like Pennsylvania, right? Pennsylvania and then Michigan. So Pennsylvania and Michigan. And then Pennsylvania and Michigan, and then we would have to give him another state. He had to win Arizona. Well, we could take out Arizona. We could probably say Wisconsin. Okay, so let's say he wins Wisconsin. That would put him on the brink of 270. Okay, the brink of 270 would be right over there. Now, what about if he were to win in Georgia? Okay, let's say he were to win in Georgia. So if you take it a prediction here with Georgia, let's say he takes 16 electoral votes in Georgia. Okay, he keeps Pennsylvania. Okay, and then he keeps Virginia. Most likely of all the swing states, Virginia is the most likely that he's going to keep. And then let's say he keeps Michigan. Okay, that's another scenario that you could end up seeing. Now, what would be another scenario here? He were to take Wisconsin. Okay, Wisconsin would be another scenario. So that would be an interesting scenario to be in there. But those are some different scenarios for Joe Biden. So he could end up winning re-election. Again, guys, we are about 10 months, I think, from the election, 10 and a half months from the election. So things could change, obviously. We don't know if Donald Trump's going to be convicted of the charges yet. If he does get convicted, I think that it's going to hurt him in the long run. I don't think that it's going to help him. I think that the convictions helped Donald Trump in the primaries to some extent. And obviously that's debatable whether you think that the indictments obviously had induced or made a Nikki Haley surge. One of the reasons that Nikki Haley won 43.2% of the vote, again, it was an open primary, but one of the reasons why she may have won 43% of the vote was because of the criminal convictions. And remember, Nikki Haley, she had this big quote that she was running on, Donald Trump is chaos. That was her quote that she ended up running on. Not running on, but she would always say that, right? Donald Trump is chaos. She said that, I believe, in an NBC interview. She said that Donald Trump is chaos, that with Donald Trump comes chaos. And the indictments may have fueled that idea of chaos, which may have yielded to Nikki Haley being able to win a sizable chunk of the vote. Now, again, you could see flips in the districts as well, and we won't get into that for the purpose of today's video. But yeah, if you like the video, please make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and make sure you like the video. It definitely helps out if you like the video. So those are several states there, and I will be putting out another video. This video was actually made a recommendation from one of the viewers who wrote down a comment in one of my comments, and I want to shout out to that viewer, and I'll see you in the next video.